and living comfortably in Peru when he was forced out of the only home he had ever known. During World War II, the United States government, in collaboration with several Latin American countries, orchestrated the forced removal and internment of over 2,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, which included both citizens of 13 Latin American countries as well as Japanese immigrants. Like young Art Shibayama, the vast majority were Japanese Peruvians. Shortly after the Japanese military attack on Pearl Harbor, community leaders were scapegoated and rounded up for detention throughout the Americas. In Peru, a blacklist had been generated. While not based on any real or credible evidence of Japanese subversive activity, the blacklist targeted businessmen, community leaders, and educators. In collaboration with Peruvian officials, the U.S. used the blacklist as the basis for rounding up hostages. These hostages were then to be traded for Americans held by Japan. Most of the Japanese Latin Americans were interned in a Department of Justice camp at Crystal City, Texas. But for Art and the other internees, their long ordeal did not end with the close of World War II. The remaining Japanese Latin Americans were told that they were illegal aliens and would be deported. And because the Latin American governments initially refused to allow these internees to return, over 1,000 were thus deported to war-devastated Japan. In an effort to call attention to their hidden history and to support efforts for redress, the Campaign for Justice was formed. In response to public pressure, the Department of Justice offered a settlement of only $5,000 each, just 1/4 of the $20,000 redress provided to the Japanese Americans. While supporting the decision of those who accepted the settlement, Art Shibayama, along with several others, chose to opt out of the settlement. He then filed his own lawsuit, preferring to fight for both redress and a full disclosure of the violations committed by the United States during World War II. Despite his efforts, Art was once again denied justice. His case was dismissed in the final months of 2002.
Hi, I'm Natsu Saito. I'm a law professor at Georgia State University in Atlanta. This opinion came down 17 years after the case was originally filed. And it tells us that the claims of the Shibayama brothers are really serious, fundamental violations of human rights. In this decision, the Inter-American Commission emphasizes that the principles of equality before the law, equal protection, and non-discrimination are among the most basic human rights, and that one of the objectives of the American Declaration was to assure in principle the equal protection of the law to nationals and aliens alike in respect to the rights set forth. The Commission also says states have an obligation to provide redress, or what we often call reparations, for wrongs that have occurred, even if they occurred a long time in the past. This is really a groundbreaking decision of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. It affirms the claims of Japanese Latin Americans who have struggled for justice for 75 years and reaffirms the obligations of the United States government to provide both access to information about and meaningful, quote, material and moral redress for longstanding violations of human rights.
I'm Becky Shibayama, and I am the daughter of Art Shibayama. On behalf of the Shibayama family and other Japanese Latin American families, we thank you for your support, and we share this milestone victory with you. Unfortunately, this victory is bittersweet since the decision was not made during my father's lifetime. Needless to say, it is extremely aggravating and disappointing that the U.S. government still has not acknowledged nor provided proper reparations for the war crimes committed against our family and over 2,200 Japanese Latin Americans. We would also like to acknowledge the thousands of men, women, and children of German, Italian, Jewish, and Japanese ancestry from Latin America and the U.S., including U.S. citizens who are imprisoned and used in the hostage exchanges. Until there is proper redress and justice, these crimes against humanity are ongoing. The Shibayama family stands in solidarity with all groups and communities currently fighting racial oppression. Our hope is that the published ruling can help lead to no more government-orchestrated kidnappings, indefinite detention, family separation, forced deportations, and no more children in today's detention camps.
While Japanese Americans were granted monetary redress with the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, the Shibayama brothers were denied access because they were neither citizens or permanent residents. And in fact, their status as legal immigrants was created by the politics of war, the racist policies, and blatant indifference to their humanity. May we pledge our solidarity moving forward to their next steps on that path towards justice.
The situations of detention, the manipulation of immigration laws, the barriers to citizenship and access to justice, the rampant discrimination, all of these are episodes and themes that are played out in the United States and around the world, and especially in situations of forced migration. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this case, from the experience. So I hope we all draw from that experience and also from the perseverance in this case. It really is an inspiration.
Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice delayed is justice denied. In Art's memory and in his honor, we demand reparations for the Japanese Latin Americans.
Our objective is U.S. government compliance with the legal decision of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We want to meet with President Biden's administration for executive action to honor and comply with the Commission's decision. We want to work with the U.S. Congress for legislative action to secure meaningful redress and reparation. We will continue our work with international human rights institutions and organizations to hold the U.S. government accountable for effective compliance. We will also mobilize our former internees and families, supporters, and the public for education and redress action. And we will build solidarity among our communities, locally, nationally, and internationally, by making connections with our histories and justice purpose. You can help. Please sign our petition to bring the Biden administration to the table to discuss redress and reparations in compliance with the Commission's decision. Mobilize your family and friends to sign our petition. Volunteer with the Campaign for Justice or the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project. Preserve and make history with us. And of course, all donations are welcome. Please stay in touch by following on our website and social media. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for bearing with me as we were figuring out the technical challenges of Zoom virtual reality. I'd like to introduce myself, and my name is Dr. Mary Kuniyu Danico. I am professor of sociology at Cal Poly Pomona and have the honor of serving as the director of Michi and Walter Weglyn Endowed Chair for Multicultural Studies. I've been involved with the Weglyn Endowment since 2003, when then President Bob Suzuki and I had a wonderful conversation about continuing the legacy for social justice on behalf of Michi and Walter. And so it has been one of my greatest professional honor to direct this program. We've had other endowed chairs previously with Jose Calderon and Enrique Ochoa, who were instrumental visiting chairs, but I stand as the sitting director for this wonderful endowment. I think for many of you who already know Michi and probably have, way more experience than I in terms of the amount of work that she and Walter has done, but especially Michi's groundbreaking book, The Year of Infamy, where many would argue was instrumental in moving the redress movement forward when it was published in 1976. And since then, we have seen an outpour of support from probably, the silent communities who have been working behind the scenes and probably not getting the recognition that they deserve. And one of the things that our speaker today, Phil Nash, will be sharing with us is, for me, a huge surprise in my own lack of awareness of not thinking about the diaspora that emerged as a result of Executive Order 9066. We sit today on February 19, 1 year short of the 80-year anniversary of the executive order that incarcerated and put Japanese Americans, over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, over 120,000, 2/3 of whom were Americans, into these internment camps. And so Michi's legacy continues. And we welcome you to visit our website as well as our Facebook page. This is now going on Facebook Live as we speak. So we hope that we can continue the dialogue and work. Just a couple of housekeeping. You will notice that if you don't have your video on, you will not be on screen. However, you're more than welcome to show your face at any time. We do have a chat feature, so thank you for those of you who were able to tell us the audio isn't working. This is our new normal, and we're trying to adjust to the best of our abilities. I think while the challenges of Zoom are emerging, we're also just thankful for the virtual atmosphere and community that we're building, because I know that we have folks from around the nation and around the world visiting us today to welcome a wonderful friend of Cal Poly Pomona, as well as friends of Michi and Walter. And so when I was thinking about what can we do to really honor all of the members of those who suffer through the internment and their families, I immediately thought of Phil Nash. Phil Nash has been a champion for the redress movement, not just in terms of, because we know Michi did that through the years of infinity, but for the Japanese Latino communities. I think for so many of the diaspora, when the Executive Order 9066 took place, we had folks pushed and displaced all around the world. And this is something that I really do need to learn more about. And I am so thankful that he is here to share with us. It is also Black History Month. And I think the mindfulness that Phil Nash is able to bring to the table is that oppression is oppression. We were talking about this prior. The work for social justice does not end with just our own communities, but looking at how do we see the intersectionalities of Black lives, as well as other ethnic minority groups. When you think about the Day of Remembrance, February 19th, and the suffering of Japanese and Japanese Americans on this day for over a year, the legacy, sadly, of hateful policies have not ended. And it is a time that we must take action together and really undo the wrongs that our government has done to so many of our people. The rising anti-Asian hate crimes that we see today is a constant reminder of the work that we must continue to do. So Phil, if you can show your face a little bit, I wanted to introduce you because I think most of the folks are here to see you and not me. But I am really excited to welcome Phil Nash, professor at University of Maryland. He is also, as I mentioned, a tremendous mentor to me and friend to Cal Poly Pomona, friend to our former president, Bob Suzuki, whose relationship with Michi and Walter allowed us to have this endowment on our campus. But Phil's work in terms of the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, Education Fund, working as a law professor, working as an Asian American Studies professor, doing engaged service learning, as well as field experiential programs in Brazil, working on behalf of indigenous communities, and to educate so many of us about the plight of the Japanese Latinos as a result of the executive order, really inspires me to get off my butt and act up. We were talking earlier that if we have so many excuses that, oh, I have to do my laundry, to I have to pay for my bills, or I have to take my driving test, whatever it may be, there's always something. Social justice needs a constant ally, advocate, support. This is social justice work doesn't sleep. And I think together we really can help move this momentum forward. And with that, Phil, thank you so much for joining us today. And at the end, we're going to open it up for some Q&As. Folks can put it in the chat, or we can unmute you and you can ask your questions. And then finally, I have two incredible Weglyn interns, if they can show their faces very quickly. We have Kelly Wynn, who's been with me for over a year, and Daniela Castillo, who has just started with us as the Weglyn intern, who have done so much of the behind the scenes work. As we talk about the people who are moving things forward, often don't get the credit. I really want to applaud Kelly and Daniela for working alongside me and being my right and left arm throughout this whole process. They will be posting a survey for all of you to fill out after, if you can. That would be great. And that way we can have your contact information as well and provide additional information if you need. So thank you, Kelly and Daniela. So with that, Phil, you ready?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to go ahead, if I can get the Zoom thing going on. I am going to share the PowerPoint and we'll be able to move forward. All good?
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say thank you to Cal Poly Pomona and everyone there for making this possible. I also want to say thank you to the Piscataway Indian Nation and the people who are here in DC whose land I'm sitting on right now. So we always have to be mindful of the people who are here before their forced removal. Many of them remain here, however. So today we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement broadly, and a lot of the movements for social justice that have taken place in the African American community and with their allies, including myself. We're going to talk about the Japanese Latin American movement. We're going to solve those issues in the next half hour. No, just kidding. We are going to introduce ourselves to these issues, and we're going to see ways that each of us can participate in them. So let's go to the next slide. The basic outline of what I want to say is here. I will spend a little bit of time on definitions and history, a little bit of time on current campaigns, and a little bit of time learning from Michi and Walter, who, as Mary said, were my good friends. I was the literary executor for Michi. I want to put in a plug for her book, Years of Infamy, which I consider to be one of the best books written in the 20th century. If you haven't read it, please do. When you think about who wrote it, a woman who was trained as a costume designer, somebody who didn't finish college, but who had a passion for justice, who had tremendous writing skills, tremendous analytical skills, but for the camps might have gone on to have a career as an academic or who knows what. But she instead put herself into the research and put this book together, included the pictures and other things that help us to understand the movement. It's really a tour de force. I teach it in my class every year, and I hope you'll take a look. But I'm going to talk about Michi and Walter because they were very good at building a sustainable, meaningful life devoted to human rights for all. And again, I'm going to talk for 20 minutes here and tell you a little overview of Black Lives Matter and JLA Redress. I'm hoping that each of you will get involved in these movements and other social justice movements and make sure that those are part of your lives every day. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. When you think of the notion,
Nash,
yeah.
I'm so sorry. Some of our participants have a hard time hearing you. Is it possible closer to the mic, perhaps?
Okay. Am I a little bit louder now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. So when you think about redress, reparations, people sometimes use them interchangeably. when you think of them from a legal point of view, reparations are part of what we call transitional justice, going from injustice to justice. And there are four parts of that process. Basically, we look at reparations, making people whole from the suffering they've had, but also we need to look at prosecuting those who did the bad things, truth seeking, having commissions or other things to bring out the facts, and institutional reforms to make sure that the little bit of compensation that is given to people is not all there is. When we think of reparations, we sometimes think of money, but we also think of apologies and other non-monetary compensation. And I think it's very important because when people have suffered, no matter what they've suffered, it's important that they be they feel that they have been vindicated in their search for justice, feel that the person who has done this or the institution that's done this is apologizing to them, acknowledging the problem, and inviting everyone to move forward. So there have been a number of interesting cases of redress and reparations over the years. I'm just mentioning them here. I hope that you will all go to Google and type in the word reparations and start reading about these and other situations. The Jews after World War II got some redress. Indigenous people in Canada, people who were in post-Tsarist Russia got some land. Uh, uh, Many other people over the years. So just read about it. There's many more stories than I can say here. Another thing I want to flag for you is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was in post-apartheid South Africa, because that was a very important process that Nelson Mandela and others took part in to make sure that people understood the gravity of what had happened before the end of apartheid, and to help to make those people whole and help to move the country forward. So again, this is something that you need to research to understand this issue. When we say Black Lives Matter, many people have used the term since the Trayvon Martin case. It's no longer just a single thing. There are many definitions of Black Lives Matter. Again, I invite you to go to Google and type in the word Black Lives Matter and read about the many different groups that are out there. We have so many groups that are taking involved in this. And in the resource section, I have a PowerPoint that is going to be available on the Weglyn website. And also we can make it available if you write to me at pnash@umd.edu, pnash@umd.edu. And Dr. Danico and others also will have that. One of the things I have there is a whole page on Black Lives Matter resources. We have groups like the Movement for Black Lives, the Black Lives Matter Global Network, people involved with HR 40, the Commission to Study the Slavery Situation, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. There are so many aspects of this that I don't want to say, spend all my time on any one, but it is important to realize it has become very diversified, and that's a good thing, because no one movement is just Malcolm or just Martin. Anytime there's a movement, there are many people involved. At the same time, we've looked at Black Lives Matter and looked at the repression and enslavement of African people starting back in 1619. We have to remember that there's something called the genocide against indigenous peoples, which has taken place since 1492. Again, we can quibble about the exact dates when it started. There are many aspects of these things that continue until the present time. And many historians say that we shouldn't look at redress as just something that addresses past wrongs, because, for example, in the case of African Americans, there was enslavement, but then after that, there was the Jim Crow era. And even up until the present day, there are differences in terms of driving while Black, applying for a job while Black, dealing with the policing elements in our society while Black. We've seen that, and we know that people are not treated fairly. So redress has to address all those things, particularly the notion of institutional reform. Again, you can see that, see more details in the resources section. In terms of current campaigns, we all saw the George Floyd video. For me, it was just so heartbreaking, and the thing that was important about it was we got to see it end to end. African American people, if you have any friends who are African American, or if you yourself are African American, you know that you do not get treated by the police force in the broader society. Yes, there are many wonderful policemen, and yes, they do a good job by and large, but the way that we have taken our need for social services, mental health services, and given all these jobs to police, and then provided incentives to people who have more arrests. It's just a terrible situation. So let's go to the next slide. So the Black Lives Matter movement has said we need something like the George Floyd Act, which is going to make major changes in policing, just reduce the militarization of the police, deal with other terrible things that affect the Black community. There's also the HR 40 redress campaign. And again, I've got a link to that, or just type in HR 40 and read about the way that the African American community is pushing to have a commission like the Japanese Americans had, called the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. They want to have a commission to look at what happened and to make proposals to the Congress so that Congress can pass a bill. And there's a wonderful book I would recommend by William Darity and Kirsten McMullen called From Here to Equality. And that book is listed in my PDF of resources. Wonderful book that talks about the overall movements for redress in current situation. And it's one of the few books that actually tries to quantify and move us past discussion. And they also try to address some of the reactions that people have had against redress, trying to help us move past the negativity to getting something substantive. We saw the video related to Japanese Latin Americans at the beginning of this program. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights took 17 years, but they did come up with a recommendation to the US government. It does not have the force of law, but it does say, hey, US government, you did something wrong, you need to redress this. So the Japanese Latin American community and their allies are taking that, and they're hoping that each of you will participate in this new phase of the redress movement. Because remember, many people saw the success of the 1988 Civil Liberties Act, where many Japanese Americans received $20,000 and an official apology. And that was a tremendous success. Let's not downplay that. It's very rare to get that type of success, and everyone who was involved in it should be very proud and very happy. But there were certain decisions that were made to put the case of the Japanese Latin Americans on the side, because they were not American citizens at that time. Many of them were citizens of Peru, or they were stateless. They had had their passports and other documents taken away. It's a case that's very complicated, and I hope that you will go to the Japanese Latin American redress page that I also have in the redress in the resource section, and read more about the case and figure out ways that you can help to bring redress to these people. So the bottom line is that human rights is the gold standard here. People try to say that what happened to the Native Americans, the African Americans, the Japanese Americans, they try to distinguish these situations. They try to say there's a little more of this, a little less of that. But the bottom line is these are all violations of human rights. And the standard that all of us should be aspiring for is that all of us are treated equally before the law. All of us have human rights. All of us work for the complete human rights of everyone else. When people try to use phrases like slavery was the original sin of America, no. First of all, we don't want it to go into the religious realm. We want to keep it secular. And don't forget, when you think of a sin, this is something that might have happened in the past, and you can be absolved for that sin by doing such and such. No. There's no way, just because your grandfather did it and your father did it, and you say you didn't do it, I'm sorry. You are living with it. You are seeing the discrimination against your African American brothers and sisters. You are today responsible for helping to end that and helping to bring redress and reparations. So again, let's get away from that religious language, get back to the secular world. This is a human rights situation. Let's go to the next slide. So learning from Michi and Walter is very important here, because like I said, there is no way we are going to solve all these problems right now. we are going to be working on this for many years. And I'm thankful to my parents who took me to civil rights things. My dad took me to the March on Washington when I was young. My mom worked as a nurse helping out people on the Lower East Side in New York and helped to desegregate the New York State Nurses Union. They were role models for me about a life committed to social justice. And when I think about what I learned from Michi and Walter, they were very gracious people. They had been through tremendous suffering. Walter was from a Jewish family from the Netherlands, and he was one of a few, I think 2 or 3 boys who of Jewish background who survived the war. During World War II, all of his family, friends, imagine you come back and you find everyone else is gone. I can go on for a long time about what Walter suffered, but the bottom line for me is he came back to this country and was so gracious, was so friendly, was so helpful. He spent his money and time helping Save the Children and other charities. He worked to support Michi, and Michi worked herself. They built a very strong relationship that sustained each of them as they continued with this work. So let me talk a little bit about how they did this, and maybe this can inspire you to do the same thing. Michi, like I said, was not able to go to college because of the war situation. And when she went to college, she developed tuberculosis, had to go to a sanitarium. And then she ended up getting into a career in show business, working on the Perry Como show. Perry Como was the most popular person of his time, like the Ed Sullivan Show or like Stephen Colbert of his time. And so for her to be the costume designer on that show was very, very prestigious. And she could have just stayed there and made a lot of money and done a lot of things. But when she heard about Watergate and saw that people at the highest levels of government were lying to their people, she said, I wonder if this is what happened to me as a Japanese American. I wonder if this is why I was put in these camps. So she went down to the National Archives and spent her own time and her own money and went every day with half a sandwich and worked from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., just stopping to unwrap and eat her sandwich. When she had to make copies, she paid for them herself. She found documents. And what was interesting was this was before the computer. So she was able to go and make 3 copies of each document, and she created her own database. She would put 1 copy under the month and year, put 1 copy under the name of the person, and 1 copy under a particular event. So if she was reading about John J. McCloy, who was very, I can't get into it, but very involved with this, she would put 1 under his name, 1 under March 1942 when this memo came out, and 1 under removal from the West Coast or whatever the issue was. So then when she was pulling this book together, she had to go back and search through her mini database. And it's really amazing how she was able to think through this years before I or a lot of people were able to use our own databases. So just to summarize in these 9 tips from Michi and Walter, they built a supportive ohana, which is the Hawaiian word for a chosen family, the people that you consider not just your biological family, but the people that you spend time with and like. Have people who can sustain you. Now during the time of COVID, we're all hurting, we're all depressed, we all need to be picked up. They were very good at building this type of ohana. Taking care of our body, mind, and spirit. Again, many people who do social justice work 20 hours a day for 2 or 3 years, and then boom, they're burned out. They just say, the heck with it, I'm going to go make a lot of money. I did what I have to do. That's enough. Well, that's fine. Thank you very much. I'm happy those people did that. But I would prefer to see each of us do a little bit of social justice work. And there are times, yes, where I have worked 20 hours a day, work. But then I've stepped back and been able to recuperate with my family and friends. And I think it's very important that you make sure you put your own body, your own mind, your own spirit first and say, hey, maybe I need to take a break and then I'll come back. Make sure you build time for justice into every day. And I know Michi and Walter did this. Michi would write letters. Michi would be on the phone with people. There was no internet, so she couldn't send emails, but I'm sure she would if she were around today. But the idea that every day she was thinking about redress was very important. It's just like if you're an athlete, every day you do sit-ups and push-ups, whether or not you can get out and play baseball or soccer. Those of you who do any sport, any activity, you know you have to do it a little bit every day. And social justice work is something that you should be thinking about every day. How could I make the world a better place for my children, for my colleagues, for my friends, for someone I met at the bus stop, for any person who needs help? I met one custodian at my job who didn't have a typewriter or didn't have a computer and couldn't make a resume. So I typed up a resume for him, helping him to get a job. He needed to get a different job, so I just typed up a resume for him. And again, you can do these little things. It doesn't have to be some earth-shaking thing that's going to change the whole world. But in the case of this one gentleman, he was able to apply for it and got another job. Make sure to give honest, loving feedback. And again, Michi and Walter were very good at that. Michi wondered, should I say things that are going to shake up the US government? Many people thought Franklin Delano Roosevelt was so liberal, so wonderful on human rights. He was a lot better than Herbert Hoover and a lot of these other people who came before him. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt had signed Executive Order 9066 that started the process of putting people in the camps. And so she realized she was going to have to challenge him. And many people said, wow, you shouldn't be doing that. And Walter said, no. Walter had been through the Nazi camps, and he said, no, you have to tell the truth. And Walter had been in Hitler's camps, and he said, Hitler called them concentration camps, but they were really death camps. Michi, you've got to call these concentration camps, which is what they were. So you'll notice that Michi writes about things. If you read her work, she talks about concentration camps. And when I wrote a piece for the Yale Law Journal back in 1985, the first footnote says that these were concentration camps. And I cited a number of government documents that Michi gave to me and her friend Eiko Herzig. I made sure to put those in there in a well-known leading law journal because I wanted everyone to know that the highest level government officials were saying concentration camp. And it was correct to say Japanese Americans and Japanese Latin Americans were in concentration camps. They were not death camps for most people, but they were concentration camps. Michi and Walter made sure to close the circle. They planned, did, and reflected on everything they did. I think it's very important if you start something, make sure you finish it. Make sure you send a thank you letter. Make sure you follow up. Make sure that everyone is taken care of. Michi and Walter were very good at that, sometimes to the detriment of their own time. When scholars said to Michi, I know you've done a lot of research about this. Can you help me with my book, with my lecture, my whatever it is? Michi spent a lot of time. If you look at the Asian American Studies community, that notion of being supportive of other people, Michi was a part of that. And Michi was somebody who mentored me and Dr. Daniko and so many others. She made sure that all of us felt welcome, and she shared of her research so that the rest of us could move ahead and tell our stories because she knew that that was part of helping the broader community. Celebrating as often as possible is very important when you're doing social justice work. I know that within the Black Lives Matter movement, there's been a lot of tough times recently dealing with the COVID crisis, along with the healthcare crises and the social justice and climate. And it's hard to take time to celebrate when so many people are dying, but you have to do it because that's all there is. We have to celebrate with a small circle of people, acknowledge the people we've lost, acknowledge the way we're feeling, acknowledge our depression, and acknowledge all those things, but take time to say, yes, we won in 1988. We had the Civil Liberties Act, but it's time to move on and support the Japanese Latin Americans as they move forward. Don't sweat the small stuff. I have a funny story about Michi here. Michi and Walter were real aesthetes. Michi was a wonderful artist. They understood art. They had wonderful works of art in their house. They loved music. They were so cultural. And yet when you went to their house, every surface was covered with black garbage bags. And if you lifted up the black garbage bag on her coffee table, sorry, Michi, for telling the story. I got to tell the truth. You would see documents. She had documents wall to wall in her house. Same thing with Iko and Jack Hertzik. They did research at the National Archives. If you went to their house down in Virginia, wall to wall documents. In fact, they moved out of their master bedroom because the whole bed was covered with documents. They slept in the little guest room. When I and others stayed at their house, we slept on the floor. So their life was consumed. And I'm not saying everyone has to do this if you're going to do social justice work, but same way everyone knows Yuri Kochiyama, whose house was really the place where Asian Americans met in New York to talk about what was going on. She was very active. She knew Malcolm X and others. When you did social justice work in the 60s, 70s, 80s in New York City, the Kochiyama house was de facto the movement headquarters. So don't sweat the small stuff. Let your house be the movement's house. Invite people in. Don't worry if there's little dust bunnies here and there. People are not going to say, "Oh my God, you've got documents sitting on your table." Years later, here I am laughing about it, but I'm saying it in a loving way. I'm celebrating that Michi and Walter loved me and loved us enough to put aside their coffee table. They would take me out to a nice Chinese restaurant. We had a great meal, but you couldn't put a cup of tea down at their apartment. Keep on growing. The Weglyns were so good at growing. I remember one time I was teaching at CUNY Law School in New York, and I was going to a gay rights rally. This was before we call it LGBT. And Michi said to me, "Well, why are you going there? You're not gay." And I said, "Well, I am supportive of my brothers and sisters who are gays and lesbians because it's important that we have social justice for all." And then she started telling me about the gays who were closeted when she was working as a costume designer, telling me about the injustice they suffered. She immediately understood, immediately wanted to be part of helping out. She had not known that term, had not thought about it, had not realized that this social justice movement was growing. But instantly she picked it up and she was part of that. When I was staying down at Iko's house in Virginia, the anti-apartheid movement was happening. So Iko and Jack went to the South African embassy and they got arrested, just like a lot of social justice activists. They did not just say, "I'm going to do Japanese American redress and the heck with the rest of you." They said, "It's important that we take a stand on behalf of the African American community. We're going to go get arrested and we're going to make our voices heard." And finally, Michi and Walter taught us all to nurture the next generation. I think they nurtured me certainly, but they were very supportive of everyone else. They realized that they were not going to be around forever and that these struggles for the African Americans, for Indigenous people, for Latinos, for Asian Americans, they were going to keep going on because we don't have a society that's based on social justice. So what Michi gave to me in her will were a couple of things, and two of them I'll show you right here. Michi left me her postage scale and a letter opener. Now the letter opener looks like a sword also. For those of you who don't know what a postage scale is, in the old days when you were mailing a letter, you would put your letter on top of this and then adjust this and figure out how heavy your letter was. And then you could figure out how much postage to put on it. And then you could mail your letter to somebody. And then a week later, 2 weeks, whatever it was, you'd get something in return. And when you got that letter, you would use this letter opener. Now, I don't use these anymore, but I keep them right here on my desk because I realize that this technology is from another era. Michi and Walter did not have the internet. They did not have cell phones. They did not have a lot of the things, the gadgets that we take for granted. But Michi and Walter had passion. They had vision. They had clarity about human rights. And they said, we are going to fight for human rights for ourselves and for everyone else. And I think that's the most important thing I would like for you to take out of this talk today. That no matter what your technology, no matter what you're doing, where you are, I hope that you will fight for human rights for every person, not just for yourself or people who look like you, people who believe like you. And for that reason, what I would like to do is to pass Michi's postage scale and letter opener to you and welcome you to a lifetime of working for human rights. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phil. You know, I am so humbled by your presentation because you remind me, and I need to get into better practice of this. This is something that I have to be more mindful of, is starting off with land acknowledgement is so important. And I'm currently in Honolulu. So, I sit on the land of Native Hawaiians here. But Cal Poly Pomona is part of the Tongva indigenous community tribe. So, thank you for that. I think also, Phil, you have to write a book. All these stories that you have. I mean, I think for those of you who don't know Phil, I mean, he looks young because he is young. And it is pretty incredible that you had the privilege, really, of meeting our pioneers of Asian American activism, from Yuri to Aiko to Michi. I mean, how many folks really can say that? And, he and I were talking earlier about, he started when he was like 19, 20 years old. I mean, a young kid. Many kids, many students, who I teach start at age 19. And it's so humbling to know that your work with activism has continued. But so let's talk about you writing this book of all these little stories, because honestly, I mean, they're just beautiful. These stories about paper trails everywhere. Reminds me of Kikuni Blaisdell in Hawaii, when I went to his home, exactly the same thing. Some of the best activists, wall-to-wall archival work and documentation everywhere. I think one of the things, and I'll welcome anyone to ask questions on the chat, and as we're moving along. But I did have a couple of questions for you that, if while we're looking at the chat box, Daniela and Kelly will do that. I think with the Japanese Latinos, I think there are many Americans and people around the world do not understand the impact the executive order had on people of Japanese ancestry around the world, and the displacements and the separation of families, right? So when we recently have heard about the separation of Latino families, I think when you see the communities that come forward, what I've noticed are often the folks who understand the Japanese American internment. If you think about the Muslim ban, or even with the attacks on indigenous communities or with undocumented communities, we see folks coming out saying, not again, right? We cannot do this again. But we really don't know much about the Japanese Latino plight, right? And I know that the PowerPoint that you shared with us, that we will share with everyone on the Weglyn Facebook page, hopefully you'll be able to kind of look at the resources. But can you share with us, in terms of maybe the number of folks who've been impacted, many of whom are deceased at this time, and then their children who are still fighting for it, but how can other folks who may not have lived through that period, or may not have relatives who are impacted by the internment, how can folks get involved? What can we do aside from giving money?
Well, there's an estimate of some 2,200 people of Japanese ancestry. And please go to jlacampaignforjustice.org, jlacampaignforjustice.org. There's a petition to support the redress campaign. There's information about the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights decision, a lot more information there. But imagine if today somebody came and just knocked on your door and took you out of your house. You didn't have time to say goodbye to your children, just took you out of your house, brought you down to the dock at the city you were in, and put you on a boat and sent you away, took your passport and other things, and you were sent up to Crystal City, Texas, and held behind barbed wire for eventually your family might have rejoined you. And then afterwards, you were stateless. Some people were deported to Japan. Some people were sent to the East Coast of the United States. This is a horrific situation. It's something called extraordinary rendition, which is kidnapping. Mm-hmm. And so this is a human rights violation of cosmic proportions. I don't have time to get into all the details, but please read more about it and realize that this is the type of thing that happened to people and is continuing to happen to people. There are people in Guantanamo right now. There are people around the world who are dealing with displacement. We obviously had children separated from their parents. here in the United States at the border. There's a lot of things that need to be protested. There's a group called TSURU for Solidarity, TSURU for Solidarity.org, a bunch of Japanese Americans who are trying to stand up against these terrible human rights violations. So please get involved with any of these groups, Google them, write to me at pnash@umd.edu, and I can put you in touch with people.
Thanks, Phil. And Kelly also posted a link for those who want to go onto the chat with a site where you can sign that petition as well. And then, we'll be sure to update a lot of these things on Facebook. Dina, I think, is this Dina, my Dina? Dina asked a question. Dina actually has also been very active in, I think it is, my eyes are so bad. I mean, I think I'm trying to squint and see if it's a Dina F, so it must be my Dina. Dina asked about the power of words and how words matter. And yeah, it is Dina. Dina has been very active in the Japanese American community here in Southern California. And she was saying that, language and words matter. And she have seen the use of concentration camp, like that we're talking about executive order and what happened to the plight of people of Japanese ancestry being put into concentration camps or internment camps or being incarcerated. She wants to see if you can help clarify a little bit or your opinion on how are they different? What do you feel are the striking differerences of those words and the use of those languages?
Well, first of all, I would like to recommend to you Aiko Herzig, AIKOHERZIG. If you look her up, she wrote a piece about the power of words, and she was the person who helped a lot of us to understand this. But basically, when governments do bad things, they use euphemisms. So would you rather say, I'm going to take all aliens and non-aliens and put them behind barbed wire, or I'm going to take all citizens and non-citizens and put them behind barbed wire? Well, obviously your antenna goes up when somebody says citizens are being put behind barbed wire, but that's what happened to 2/3 of the people, including my mom and others born in this country. So when we refer to certain people as aliens, throughout Asian American history, alien has had a particular meaning. Filipino Americans were called nationals. Terminology is very important. Concentration camps, like I said before, that was a phrase used during the Boer War, the BOER war, back around the turn of the 20th century, when the white British people were fighting the white people of Dutch ancestry in South Africa. The idea is you concentrate people in a particular area. Well, when it also includes killing them, like what Hitler did, then that becomes death camps. So again, the US was able to say that these are relocation centers, but relocation just means there's a flood and I will relocate you for your benefit, as opposed to putting you behind barbed wire in a concentration camp. So again, always think critically about words that government people use when they describe particularly these type of injustices.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Dina, for that question. And on the chat box, I know, Phil, like I'm usually really bad about checking the chat and talking because I can't do multiple things at once. And so I apologize in the beginning as I was trying to do 3 things at the same time. But I think folks are truly inspired by your presentation. And many of, I assume your friends who are on here are just kind of warmed by the memories that I think your stories have kind of triggered, just warm memories of Michi and just the fondness that they have for you and for the work that you do. And it is an interesting word because I think for many of the activists who are, fighting this good fight, we often don't think about warm and fuzzy, but for me, I really do think of warm and fuzzy when I think about these badass people who have been fighting for social justice. I mean, they're so fierce warriors and pioneers who, I hope to emulate in some capacity, but so kind and so nurturing and so caring. And you definitely continue that legacy, Phil. And I know that Michi would be so proud and so happy that you and I stay in touch and have become friends throughout all this. So I know our time is up. I really want to thank the folks who took the time to log in today and listen. Daniela has just posted a Google Doc, if you don't mind just filling out your impressions and your thoughts of our Weglyn event. I also did ask for many of you who have shared stories or just sentiments of memories that you've had with Michi. Please reach out to me. I posted my email on there, mkydenico@cpp.edu. I'm serious. I think we should write a book about all of these stories. I think we should collect these oral histories. I think it is so important. You know, I think most recently, I think you heard during the whole, prior to the insurrection on Capitol Hill, with the rise of the ultra neo-Nazis here in the United States. And, you know, we know that in Southern California, you know, they're at our back door. So we've always known that they're here. But it was shocking to know that so many young kids did not know about the Holocaust. They had no idea. So even more so, if you imagine folks don't know about the Holocaust, many don't know about the Japanese American internment concentration camps. And especially even more would not know about the Japanese Latinos and the Japanese diaspora, you know, in terms of there are other parts of the world that folks of Japanese ancestry were, you know, voted off to or moved to. And so this is so important for us to continue the work. I think a lot of times when people say, well, what does the past have to do with the present? I think you remind us that it has everything to do with what's happening right now, with Black Lives Matter, with the undocumented communities, with the Islamophobia, the xenophobia that we're seeing. It's the same type of formula that's being used, that's camouflage. And what's really wonderful, and I think so many people are sharing this, is that it is an inspiration to all of us to keep up the good fight in good company with our ohana. So thank you so much, Phil. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming today. And we look forward to staying in touch. Please stay in touch and please fill out the survey. And Phil, soon we'll get together.
Right. Come to DC.
Well, you know, I go there. I used to go there somewhat regularly, but maybe next year when things are better. Please stay safe, everyone. Wear your mask. Get vaccinated when it's your time. It's my opinion. So, you know, hopefully you want to get vaccinated too. And yeah, so we could be together in person one day. Thank you so much. Bye. That was great, Phil. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to end stop the live stream.